to a bonus episode of the Blooms and Barnacles podcast. I'm Kelly.
I'm Dermot.
And I'm assuming you probably know that if you're watching this on Patreon. But I think this video will eventually go farther and wider, but you get the exclusive debut. So if you're dropping in and you're not familiar with Blooms and Barnacles, Dermot and I normally talk about James Joyce's novel, Ulysses. But today we are answering the question, could an AI write Ulysses? This was originally a talk we gave at the Bloomsday festival in Dublin in 2025. We spoke at the James Joyce Centre there in Dublin and gave it to a live audience. So if you were in the crowd for that, thanks so much for coming. But we wanted to re-record this, not because we were unhappy with that talk. I think we're actually quite happy with it. It was a really good evening, and the Q&A after was just fantastic. We went, I think, an hour over time. The Joyce Centre was very generous with their time. We were the last performance of the evening, and we kept them there late, so we do want to graciously thank them for being so patient with us. Our talk time was confined to an hour. We just have a lot more to say about this topic. We're going to more or less run through the script we wrote for that. You won't be seeing as much of us throughout this because we're going to edit in the slideshow we used at the Joyce Centre because, again, we just think it's really good and really illustrates a lot of our points. And Dermot uses slides anyway in a normal video. So I think that's all we need to say. All right, well, let's get into it. Could an AI write Ulysses? Introduction. If Joyce were to write Ulysses in 2025, he'd need to include a data center to complete the urban landscape of Dublin. Each data center may contain thousands of GPUs chugging away, and one of their functions is artificial intelligence. AI is the buzzword du jour, and we have all been encouraged to think about how we might incorporate it into our own day-to-day lives or into our jobs. And as Joyce is a big enough part of your life that you're listening to this video or watching this video, we must also ask ourselves, does AI have a place in the Joyce space, the Joyce-sphere, right? What would that even mean? And is it something that we would want to do at all? So these are the questions we must ask ourselves. The title of our video today is, could an AI write Ulysses? Dermot, could an AI write Ulysses? Dermot, could an AI write Ulysses?
No.
That's correct. The title is pure clickbait, so thanks for clicking. And please watch to the end. The real question then is, why couldn't it? And we're going to spend the rest of this video answering why not. I mean, after all, anytime you open up your news app of choice or your social media app of choice, you see posts about how people fall in love with AIs, about how chatbots are begging their creators not to unplug them, please, or people even finding God or spirituality in AI. So, what's the deal with AIs?
People are going mad.
Yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Dermot here. I've kind of organized this like Ithaca, so it's all question and answer. Our first question is, what do we mean when we say AI?
The challenge is to keep the topic focused on Joyce, and we're going to be veering off that track just for a moment, but we are going to come back to Joyce and Ulysses very soon. We'll circle around. So what do we mean by the term AI? People use this term to mean a lot of things. It can mean the tech on our devices, things like autocomplete, Siri, text-to-speech, algorithms on social media platforms, and even spell check. The AI we're talking about today is better termed generative AI, a program that can create text, images, or video based on a verbal prompt. Because our focus is literature, we're going to focus on LLMs, large language models, programs like OpenAI's ChatGPT, Microsoft's Copilot, Anthropic's Claude, Google's Gemini, and Meta's Llama. Out of those, we'll focus on ChatGPT because that's the most popular at the moment, but much of what we say could be applied to any of the models. LLMs produce text based on a verbal prompt from a user. You can ask them to, say, write an email or a sales pitch. You can ask ChatGPT to write Ulysses, and it will refuse.
And we did ask it to write Ulysses, so we use ChatGPT mainly for this, as Dermot says, and I thought, since our question is, could an AI write Ulysses, we should take the direct approach. So I fired up ChatGPT. I typed in the prompt, write a novel like James Joyce's Ulysses, please. And ChatGPT responded, creating a novel like James Joyce's Ulysses is a monumental task due to its complexity, unique stream of consciousness style, deep allusions to classical literature, and experimental structure. While a complete novel would take extensive time and effort, I can craft the opening section of a story in Joyce's style. Would you like it to be set in a particular time, place, or theme? Look, I don't think we're spoiling the talk entirely to say, I think that maybe a few years back you could ask it to write something approximating Ulysses and it might have given you text directly from Ulysses. I think one guardrail that's been imposed on these large language models, particularly ChatGPT, is to bypass questions like this because they sometimes generated large portions of copyrighted works when prompted to do so. So I think that is why we're getting this response, but we're kind of getting ahead in our outline here.
Yeah.
Take it away, Dermot.
So although you can ask ChatGPT to write Ulysses and it will refuse to write Ulysses, that's not why the answer to our lecture's question is no. And we're going to get to that. LLMs work by training them using existing text, and based on that training data, the LLM performs a series of complex math calculations, determining statistically what text is most likely to correspond with whatever came before. It's like the autocomplete in your texting app of choice, which thinks one word ahead, whereas ChatGPT thinks in blocks of text.
Thank you, Dermot. Here's another question for you. So, can AI think?
Well, it depends what you mean by thinking. It defined thinking.
Oh, no.
So, I keep saying that AI is thinking, but we have to be really clear that AI is not thinking at all. And it's very difficult to speak about this tech without anthropomorphizing it. But we must constantly remind ourselves that it is not human. You'll hear us slip again and again before we finish, but the answer to the question on the screen is no. Generative AI was described in 2021 as a stochastic parrot, stochastic meaning statistically random, and parrot meaning a thing that repeats without understanding. This term is stuck because it is illustrative of how generative AI works. AI does not think in the same way that humans or other sentient creatures think. It relies on complex mathematical calculations to predict what is statistically the most likely language to respond to a query, and emphasis on the word statistically because that's really significant. It really does feel like AI understands you and is communicating, but it's ultimately an illusion. It can be a very convincing illusion though. One confusion is the conflation of AI and AGI, which stands for Artificial General Intelligence. AGI is akin to what you might have seen in movies like Terminator or Her. That's a sentient computer that possesses an awareness of the world around it and which can act independently of humans. This technology, however, still belongs in the realm of fiction.
So to illustrate Dermot's point, we have a quote here from an article in Verso entitled, "Is the AI Bubble About to Burst?" from June of 2025. And it reads as follows. Oh, I should say this is from Aaron Benanav. I'm not sure, Benanav. And the quote reads, "The fundamental limitations of generative AI have become increasingly apparent, even to many of its early champions. As Francois Chollet and other AI researchers have pointed out, deep neural networks suffer from inherent brittleness. They struggle to generalize beyond their training data." I'm not sure, Benanav. And the quote reads, "Fail at basic reasoning tasks and remain unreliable for applications requiring consistency or accuracy. Despite hoovering up enormous quantities of digital information, these models confront hard limits in their capacity to learn or adapt. Part of the problem lies in the very architecture of artificial neural networks, which were designed on the basis of mid-20th century behaviorist psychology. Unlike organic brains, which come equipped with rich internal structures, innate goals, and representational frameworks, artificial networks are largely unstructured, relying on brute statistical association. The human mind can grasp a new concept from a few examples. Machine learning models typically require millions. Hybrid approaches that integrate symbolic reasoning with deep learning, such as AlphaFold 2's success in protein folding, offer more promising results, but they must be painstakingly designed for specific tasks. There is no general method for building modular, structured cognition into deep learning systems, and no guarantee that one will be found."
So to give AI its due here, it does admit that there's a specific use in narrow cases where it can be trained with a very fine-grained focus. Protein folding is a famous problem in the field of science. People struck with that for a long time. It requires vast amounts of computation, so it's ideal for computers. NASA, of course, all the data from Hubble and the James Webb Telescope is indescribably huge. There's simply not enough human brain power to really analyze that in depth. Same with even craters on a new asteroid or planet. Very, very hard to pull all that data together. And that's a good potential use of AI. Find me something unusual. Or I'm looking for a certain kind of crater. Pull them out. Rather than humans used to have to do it. Crater counting, it was horrendous.
Yeah.
That's the kind of tedious work that we should and could offload to computers if we want to have technology at all. Yeah. The thing that really jumped out here is a human can extrapolate from a few particulars. Right. But a machine requires millions. And that's a huge problem, of course, because then finding where do you find the millions? And if those millions contain garbage, then you have the garbage in, garbage out problem. If you're farming stuff from Reddit and 4chan, there's lead and gold even on both of those sites, but to varying degrees. But a lot of lead, and now you're farming that, like put Elmer's glue on pizza. That was pulled probably from a joke someone made. Garbage in, garbage out.
And because it can't think, it can't tell that that's a joke.
Right.
It understands the structure of language, but not something like pragmatics.
Right.
That would tell, any human who speaks that language, oh, this person didn't mean you should actually put Elmer's glue on your pizza. But if you just scrape the data, that's now in there. What I find very interesting is that these language models are very beholden to their training data, the data that's fed into the computer that allows them to do these statistical calculations. I think you've already said that. I can't remember if it's coming up or if we've already said it. If they're trained on a very narrow set of data, they will perform within the parameters of that data. So this is true for like mathematical models. I think especially in fields like engineering, these can be very useful. They're very good at completing tasks that have a discrete answer, like a math question. But as we'll see, there's pressure on these models because they're incredibly expensive and incredibly energy intensive to train in addition to run. There's an enormous pressure to make back all this initial investment. Financially, it's hard to shoehorn them into a narrow case, so they tend to get sold to us, the general public, as generalists, and they are terrible at being generalists because you're getting outside of those narrow parameters in which they operate pretty quickly. And when the chatbots end up in the realm of just open-ended questions, they really can go off the rails pretty quickly because they don't actually know how to think. There's too great a statistical variance if you ask it something like, what do you think about Ulysses? There's no right answer to that, so they kind of fall apart pretty quickly. It can be very convincing, like Dermot said, what they're saying. It feels like cognition. It feels like they've thought about it, but again, that's just the product of some math taking place behind the scenes. I'm going to hand it back to Dermot now.
Promoting current AI models as more powerful than they are is part of the current AI hype cycle and puffery, often employed by Silicon Valley companies to entice billions of dollars of investment from venture capitalists.
Right. So part of that hype is convincing us that there's a machine that can think. It's a completely novel thing. We've never had a machine that can think, right? But a lot of science fiction has promised that's the future, and we're living in the future, so we should have flying cars and sentient computers. Because it feels like you're having a genuine interaction with these chatbots when you are talking to them. They are not really talking back. They're generating text. But we can trick ourselves into believing they're real. It's necessary for the AI companies to convince us that they're really talking to us. Because again, that's how they raise investment funds. So you'll get headlines like the one on the screen, which is from The Guardian from April of 2025. It says, BBC harnesses AI to create writing classes given by Agatha Christie. So, and the sub-headline, videos will share authors' tips on everything from story structure and plot twists to the art of suspense. This is a journalistic outlet directly marketing to us that this AI not only can think, but that it is Agatha Christie. So, having read the article, they took the works of Agatha Christie and trained a chatbot using those and have set it up so that, I guess if you're like, how do I make the twist in my mystery story believable? Agatha Bot will tell you. And we're meant to believe this is literally talking to Agatha Christie, a woman who's been dead for decades and decades and decades. Writing classes given by Agatha Christie is the headline. That is a literal impossibility because she does not live. And the chatbot is not her, but we are strongly being encouraged to anthropomorphize the bot. But whenever you see this is a sales pitch because these bots cannot think. They do not possess the mind of Christie or anyone else, even if they have been fed all of her works and are now performing calculations based on those texts. Like, they haven't even read the text in the way that a human mind would read the text. So I'm really annoyed with this headline in particular. There are plenty others, and the Guardian is, I guess I'd say on here, I didn't say the Joyce, but I think very unscrupulous with their coverage of AI in this
Guardian's
fashion.
A terrible newspaper in general. It's
Okay.
a terrible, terrible source
There
of
was
information.
there was one just from the last week or so as we're recording this. The frontman of the band The Beach Boys, Brian Wilson, died, and there was a Guardian columnist, and I don't have this up here, but they wrote, "Oh, this great musical genius has died. End of an era." That's fine. I'm not complaining about that. But this one in particular said that Brian Wilson has died. He was a singular musical genius. You know, we won't have anyone like him in the future. So this is a problem that AI will have to solve, because what that assumes is there could never be another person as brilliant as Brian Wilson, which is wild to me. I'm still, like, in the process of wrapping my head around the thought process that would get you there.
I've read some cretinous stuff in The Guardian, but that's top 10.
But that I thought was awful. Just awful.
An insult to life itself.
Yes, as Hayao Miyazaki said. And if you love Brian Wilson's music that much, it's an insult to Brian Wilson.
Yeah, we're gonna put all your music in our slot machine and crap out stuff that's all derived from it, but it'll never be new or fresh, because you could make something new or fresh, but it can't. It can only extrapolate stochastic parrot music. Because
it can't think, and that's kind of the point we're getting at. And Dermot, I have a question for you. We're saying it can't think, but what does it mean to think? Like, I go very quickly from, like, it said this weird thing about, this person said this weird thing about Brian Wilson, to what does it mean? What does it say about life and society? And that's where I am right now. What do we even mean when we're saying think?
Well, one of the most tedious cul-de-sacs I went down to when I was researching for a previous project was philosophy of mind. The Wikipedia page, if you just want to troll that, is interesting because there's no agreement. There's been thousands of years of philosophers, neurologists, scientists arguing about this. And my favorite, like, there's monism, dualism, and all the different, like, there's even eliminative materialism, which says we're not even conscious at all. That what we perceive as consciousness is just an illusion. I saw an interview, a lecture with Rupert Sheldrake, who is maybe more on the mystical side, or let's say, of science.
I think so.
Describe this to a room, a general audience, and of course they burst out laughing because you're telling a bunch of conscious people that they're not conscious. So they were right to laugh. It's like that Simpsons. They're right to laugh at you, Ralph. Okay. My favorite branch of philosophy of mind is Mysterianism, and the clue is in the name, which says it's just a mystery and we'll never know because the mind is too complex for our minds to comprehend themselves. The Neoplatonic path is like we're connected to a divine mind or a fragment of it, the nous. Yeah, I think these people that are coming from Silicon Valley regard themselves as incredibly intelligent. I would say, like, the AI that's working on protein folding, they are very intelligent in an extremely narrow slice of what constitutes knowledge. They don't seem to know the difference between quantity and quality. They don't seem to understand that they've blundered into, like, a universe of paradox. And they seem to think that just by compiling, this is something Miriam Midgley in one of her books, I think Science and Dolphins and Utopias, or Science as Salvation, she dealt with it over multiple books. And she died before the AI thing kicked off, lucky for her. But she said that there's a sort of she didn't call it a cult, but definitely like a philosophy in the technocratic end that simply by compiling more and more data, raw, brute data, that if we just get enough data, that out of that data, something amazing will emerge. And she said this is insane because without a philosophy or a value system, and she's coming from the more Aristotelian worldview, without like a philosophical underpinning to what you're doing, you're just dealing with nonsense. And some data is just banal. It doesn't have like anything that's usable or meaningful in any great sense. That's what they're doing with the data mines on this. They're just mindlessly compiling more and more and more data Some of it might be useful. A lot of it's just garbage. This is kind of what warps my mind, like watching these people talk about thinking and intelligence and AI. They don't even know what I is. Mm-hmm. If you don't even know what I is, how are you able to make AI? And it's that lack of humility, that like sheer hubristic arrogance, that they are so intelligent. And yet when you hear them talking about any subject outside of their very narrow field of expertise, they're idiots.
They're not good generalists. Yeah. Like they're very good at one specific thing.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you just you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, is it?
That's an inability to recognize your own incompetence.
Yes, they've got that nicer too. When I said it, yeah, is if you're very, very smart, sometimes you can't recognize when you're not being so smart. I think the more charitable way I'm going to stick with is sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. It's hard to see your own gaps or knowledge or your weaknesses. And if you are surrounded by people and you're very, very wealthy and powerful and successful, it's harder to find people to tell you no when there's the potential to make billions of dollars on the line. And I think that is a weakness of the Silicon Valley model.
Look, one aspect of philosophy of mind that when you begin encountering it is philosophers of mind come up with extremely elaborate thought experiments to try to wrestle with it. So they have, for example, we talk about qualia. Like when you're looking at us on the screen right now, you'll see the beige wall behind us that we want to paint. You'll see that the red on the chairs behind us. That's colors being generated by your mind. The human mind sees the spectrum of the electromagnetic slice, that very thin slice of visible light, converts that into this image that we perceive in our mind, along with the sounds, the tastes, and all your touch. That's all qualia, Qualia. And we have interiority. Like you can close your eyes and still imagine that.
Close your eyes and see. Yes. This is This is what Proteus is about.
Yes, it is. Yes. It is. Proteus is all about this.
Yes.
And when these people talk about AI, there's no qualia in an AI. It only has access to data. It only has access to ones and zeros. It doesn't taste. It doesn't, in any meaningful sense, see. It can convert, if you plug it to a camera or give it an image, it can convert that into numbers, but it doesn't have interiority. It doesn't have self-awareness. So anyway, philosophers of mind struggle with this. One of the concepts they came up with was the philosophical zombie. And a philosophical zombie is a human like just you or me. That's not eating brains. He's just walking around, working, driving the bus, fixing the wall, talking into a microphone for a podcast. But there's nothing inside.
There's nothing inside?
Yeah, it's a zombie.
I thought I was really smart.
It's a zombie. And the external philosopher of mind strokes his chin, goes, I don't know if you are a human being with interiority and qualia, or are you just a philosophical zombie? It's getting back to Descartes, right?
So, Dermot, can I ask you a question then? So, I find what you're saying very convincing. So, if we don't really know what intelligence or even consciousness is, how are these AI companies defining intelligence in their artificial intelligence?
This is my favorite part. The big brains in Microsoft in December 2024, it was reported that OpenAI and Microsoft owns OpenAI, remember, they have a contractual agreement that they have achieved AGI when OpenAI makes 100 billion with a B, in profit. So it's about money.
Yeah.
So they've solved all those things we've been taught, qualia, interiority, monism, dualism, Descartes, B.F. Skinner. Nah, we just make 100 billion.
Can I read a quote from TechCrunch? I believe this is from late 2024 by Maxwell Zeff. Microsoft and OpenAI have a financial definition of AGI. Report. Microsoft and OpenAI have a very specific internal definition of artificial general intelligence, AGI, based on the startup's profits according to a new report from The Information. And by this definition, OpenAI is many years away from reaching it. The two companies reportedly signed an agreement last year stating OpenAI has only achieved AGI when it develops AI systems that can generate at least $100 billion in profits. That's far from the rigorous technical and philosophical definition of AGI many expect. This year, OpenAI is reportedly set to lose billions of dollars, and the startup tells investors it won't turn a profit until 2029. So, take that, philosopher. Okay. We think AI doesn't think, and their intelligence is defined by profit margins. Does this cause any problems with the tech? Like, it still works, right? Right?
Sorta.
Certainly a leading question for me. Continue.
So one outcome of these stochastic parrot LLMs is what is commonly known as hallucination. Sometimes the statistically appropriate text they generate isn't factually accurate, even when it feels factually accurate. So ChatGPT will spit out answers to your every question with lightning speed, but that doesn't mean that that information is accurate, and worse, it doesn't seem that this flaw can be solved with the current tech.
Okay. So we have a quote here from the New York Times from May 2025. The headline on this article: AI is getting more powerful, but its hallucinations are getting worse. And the quote reads, "Today's AI bots are based on complex mathematical systems that learn their skills by analyzing enormous amounts of digital data. They do not and cannot decide what is true and what is false. Sometimes they just make stuff up, a phenomenon some AI researchers call hallucinations. On one test, the hallucination rates of newer AI systems were as high as 79%.
So these hallucinations might be inherent to the design of the LLMs. You might be able to rebuild Dublin from details in Ulysses, but you're going to have a really hard time doing that with ChatGPT. So this is probably one of our favorite images. It's an AI map of Ireland. And now
An AI-generated map of
generated,
Ireland.
yes.
Yeah.
So they got the shape right. The coast is correct, at least.
I think it is. I haven't really looked at it.
Yeah, that's right. That's pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing jumps out at me. But as you can see, Ulster is Unster. There's a place called London Girl.
Londo Girl.
Girl. The north of Ireland is at the south of Ireland, which is great. Down is down, not... well, I guess down is down.
Down is down. It should be up, but it's down. Dublin is now in the county of Armagh.
Yes.
Which is Armagh, but when pirates.
Yep. And Galway is gone, and it's just a big green field.
It just does not want to comment on the existence of Connacht whatsoever, so...
Yeah, and they hate Cork, too.
Yeah, Cork is now in Northern Ireland.
At least the letters look like letters.
Okay. It does have letters on it, yes. Okay. Alright, we'll stop I'm making fun. We've rehearsed this so many times, and obviously we did it live. We're never tired of making fun of this map.
So here is an example that we encountered playing around with the James Joyce chatbot on ChatGPT.
We generated a bunch of text using a variety of chatbots on ChatGPT. More about that later on. But when I went back and was reading through more carefully some of the text it generated, I thought, I'm sure there are hallucinations in this because they're so common. I wasn't trying to trick the bot or get it to say something wrong. I was trying to play along with it and use it as intended. And this bot, as Dermot said, is called James Joyce. And it's meant to be that you're talking to James Joyce. So the thing I already complained about with Agatha Christie, this is meant to simulate. I'm just going to say it talks really weird. This is not how ChatGPT generally sounds. But this all in a later section, so we'll circle back around to that. But I do want to emphasize, this is the first question that I asked the bot, and the hallucination is in the first sentence that it said. So I didn't have to dig for this or finagle anything. It was just straightforward question right out the gate. And I asked it as if I was asking James Joyce. I asked, what's the weirdest thing you and Gogarty ever did? And I won't read you the whole thing, but you can see it in the video. But the first line says, Gogarty, that silver-tongued Medico-Minerva. Buck Mulligan in the flesh and froth, laughter lacquered with laudanum. And something jumped out to me about this, which is, I know that, I think Gogarty hit the bottle a bit, but I didn't ever hear that he was big on laudanum. And I would have thought the heyday of laudanum would have kind of come and gone before he was in his adulthood. So I was like, I don't know though, he was a freewheeling guy, maybe there's all kinds of stuff about Gogarty's biography I don't know. So I looked it up, as I would with anything related to this kind of stuff. I googled it and read through some sources, and overwhelmingly there was no mention of Gogarty and laudanum, more so than finding a source that says Gogarty didn't do laudanum. You'd get that thing where, under your search results, it says does not include laudanum and the words crossed out because there's just no association there. I think it was going for the alliteration, laughter lacquered by laudanum. It could have said liquor.
It loves triples.
Really?
It loves triples.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they programmed that in.
Okay. Yeah, so, and I did get, when I first Googled it, you'll see this here on the screen too, you get the Google Gemini AI overview, and it says there's no information in the provided search results about Oliver St. John Gogarty's use of laudanum. You shouldn't trust Google Gemini either. It also hallucinates a lot. I do enjoy pitting the chatbots against one another.
One of them's wrong.
Yes. I mean, obviously this is pretty low stakes, but, imagine you're asking it for necessary or information. Like, people are being encouraged to use these as stand-ins for therapists or medical advice, or...
They were told to eat a rock a day.
That's from, Google Gemini. When the Gemini AI overview first launched, someone asked it, should I smoke while pregnant? And it said, yes, you should smoke a couple cigarettes while pregnant, doctors say. And, I mean, it's funny to us because it's obviously wrong, but you can imagine there's maybe someone very young that doesn't know that. Mm. I don't know, it's not good. Like, there's so much misinformation on the internet. The hallucinations cause these to be misinformation generators, and as of this recording in June of 2025, it seems like this is a major stumbling block for these AI companies because they don't know how to stop them hallucinating. Mm. The hallucinations I consider just a total deal breaker. Mm. One thing you hear a lot is people like to trot out the old cliche like, well, when they invented the printing press, people didn't like that either. Or when they brought out the calculator, people thought that no one could do math anymore.
Can you imagine if Gutenberg runs a few Bibles off the press and he's rewritten it all?
Yes. So we quoted that some of the hallucinations are as high as 79%. Most tests aren't that high. They'll hover between 0 and 10%. A lot of them. Some are much higher. Let's say I had a calculator and I'm doing my high school math homework with it, which is the last time I used a calculator. 1% of the answers it gave you was wrong. So 1 in 100 answers it gave you was wrong, and you couldn't tell which without really, doing a lot of background checking. Would you keep using that calculator?
You certainly wouldn't fly on a plane with a 1 in 100 chance of
Yes.
crashing. Nobody would fly on that plane.
Yes. The instruments in the airplane, 1 out of 100 times will tell you something completely wrong, and you wouldn't be able to easily tell.
Yeah. 1 French fry in 100 has poison in it. But enjoy.
I think it was a tweet where someone said, if I gave you a bowl of Skittles and 1 in 100 had shit in it, you wouldn't eat any of the Skittles. Mm-hmm. Because that's too dangerous. If there was 100 Skittles and one was a shittle, you wouldn't eat any of them.
Yeah.
That's what I want to leave you with, and Dermot's going to set me up for the next bit here. Don't eat the shittles.
The $1 million question. Mm-hmm. Can AI write a novel?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the question we're asking. Couldn't AI write Ulysses? So could it just write a novel in general? And I'm going to say no. Hallucinations may be less of a problem when you're creating fiction, but the stochastic parrots have another problem when writing long-form fiction or long-form nonfiction, which is that because they cannot think, they also cannot remember what they wrote. So I have a quote here from an article in Psychology Today by John Nosta. It is entitled AI and the Continuity Conundrum, examining the role of continuous thought in the emergence of technosentience. And Dermot's going to read that.
In contrast, current LLMs operate on a prompt-to-prompt basis, with their minds, quote-unquote, effectively wiped clean after each interaction. They lack the carryover of memory and the capacity for continuous thought that humans possess. This discontinuity raises doubts about whether LLMs can truly achieve a type of self-awareness that humans exhibit.
Okay, thank you, Dermot. So, as a result, LLMs struggle to maintain internal logical consistencies as they produce longer texts. Maintaining continuity over multiple paragraphs, much less multiple pages or chapters, seems to be outside the current abilities of LLMs. Yeah, they're just not thinking about what they're writing. That's why I think it's important to not anthropomorphize even to the point of saying speaking or writing, because they're just generating. They don't have a sense of how words relate to one another beyond the statistical. If you're writing a longer work, when ChatGPT specifically generates a response, it'll generate some paragraphs and then kind of ask if you want to keep going. So, but each time you enter a new prompt, it's effectively starting over. Yeah, there's a real continuity problem. Another thing too is the issue of repetition. So I've got an example here from Google Gemini of someone asking for a 5-year anniversary gift idea.
AI overview. 5-year anniversary gifts can include things like a new set of dishes, a new set of glasses, a new set of knives, 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 a new set of knives.
Dermot.
Okay.
I thought you're getting lost in it.
Yeah.
So, what you see here is this kind of repetition. It'll usually be more subtle. They'll kind of circle around things and they'll come up again and again. This is much more dramatic. It starts out with a new set of blank, a new set of blank, a new set of blank, and then gets stuck on knives, which feels very murderous because they don't think or have thoughts or intentions or premeditations. I don't know that they're actual murder bots, and I don't even want to say yet because it's still hyping them beyond their capabilities. Anyway, this new set of knives business is kind of the verbal equivalent of those AI-generated pictures that have like 7 fingers.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, well, we put 5 fingers, so statistically there should still be more fingers, and they just kind of keep going, and they're not always sure where to cut off. It's a similar thing happening here. It looks psychotic, but it's just a math error, basically. If you want AI to write you a novel, and you want it to write Ulysses, or something as complex as Ulysses, or even Finnegan's Wake, there's just absolutely no way for an LLM to generate the qualities we'd associate with a novel like that. You know, things like the depth of reference and allusion you find in Ulysses, or the elaborate punning language of Finnegan's Wake. These are just complete non-starters, so literary fiction is pretty difficult for these. I think if you're writing something that's maybe a little, like, more basic, certain kinds of, like, genre fiction or, like, pulpy types of fiction, you might be able to fudge it more, but I still think the continuity issue means it's gonna require a lot of editing and massaging from the writer, to the point where you should just write it yourself at that stage. Like, I don't know. Anything generated from this too, you did not write. The bot generated it. So, and as Dermot mentioned too, there are some kind of peculiarities to the way that ChatGPT writes. I could sit here and tell you what it does and doesn't do, but I think the best way to demonstrate this is to share some sample text that I use ChatGPT to generate. When we talk about continuity, it's hard to demonstrate very long form text in the podcast because I would have to sit here and just read you reams and reams and reams of these stories. We did have them generate some longer ones, but I have a couple samples here that I think kind of demonstrate in short form where this just isn't a very strong use case for this generative text. It wouldn't generate me Ulysses, so I asked it for a story that's kind of inspired by Ulysses. ChatGPT says, here's the opening of a story inspired by Ulysses, set in Dublin on June 16th, 1904. Dermot's going to read that.
Morning vapours. St. Stephen's Green swelled alive in the morning, a bellyful of breath, clouds wisping out from the trees' nostrils, the city an old woman waking, blinking, muttering to itself in the cobblestone cracks. Dublin, moaning awake, brushed her teeth with rain. Leo Byrne stood in the doorway off Grafton Street, fumbling with the broken shoelace. His fingers, pale as cod fillets, strained at the knot's resistance. "Damnable thing," he muttered, pulling it tighter, too tight, cutting off circulation to his faith in the day. Overhead, gulls laughed, their wings slicing the fog like fish knives.
I've heard this so many times that I don't even laugh at it anymore. I'm laughing at the fact that I'm not laughing at it. I'm just so tired of this. So this is a story, and this is inspired by Ulysses. And you can see maybe some ways in which it is. It takes place in Dublin. Grafton Street does appear in Ulysses, but I think it just knows set in Dublin. Stephen's Green and Grafton Street are two of the most famous locations in Dublin, so it puts those in. I think inspired by, the more I've thought about, is obviously Leopold Bloom becomes Leo Byrne. This is the first 2 paragraphs of him, and again, I didn't cherry pick, I just took the first 2. We later meet Leo Byrne's wife, Molly Gahan, so it's in the neighborhood, but it changes it all the same. So I guess that's the inspired by. I mean, stylistically or in any way, this really doesn't resemble Ulysses. I think if you got this without the context that we're delivering it, you'd be hard-pressed to know that this isn't meant to be in any way related to Ulysses. But I do want to talk about the figurative language, particularly in that first paragraph. There's just so much figurative language piled on top of each other. Yeah, I used to teach writing. If a student turned this in, I would kind of tell them to pick one and stick to it and maybe develop it. But there's just so much personification here. And when you look at it a little bit closer, it just doesn't make logical sense. The worst offender in this, the Dublin moaning awake brushed her teeth with rain. What does that mean? Like, why is rain like brushing your teeth? But the worst offender, though, is clouds wisping out from the tree's nostrils. Again, you just start at, like, if you think about it, it just raises so many questions. Like, is this where ChatGPT thinks clouds come from? From trees' nostrils? Trees don't have nostrils. Clouds are water vapor that accumulates in the sky. When I was playing around with the chatbots, there were many examples like this. This is not unique to this. And I took one and asked it, what do you mean by this? And I don't remember what it was, but it just kind of went through and defined all the words. So it would say, clouds are this, wisping means this, trees means this, nostrils mean this. Therefore, the therefore didn't really, like, tie it up at all. It was just strange. The other thing too I would point out is there's no connective tissue between these two. Like, we get an establishing descriptive paragraph in Stephen's Green, and then we jump to presumably the main character in Grafton Street, which is nearby, but they're distinct settings.
You have to cross the street. It's a big street to get from
Yeah. So it's like, why isn't he in Stephen's Green? Or if we're setting our first scene in Grafton Street, why not describe Grafton Street? Well, my answer to that would be because the bot doesn't know what it's saying. It's just kind of running through this. I asked at this point, ChatGPT, could you change the characters to Leopold and Molly Bloom? Kind of imagining that we'd just do like a find and replace on this text. And it says, here's a revised version featuring Leopold and Molly Bloom, set in Dublin on June 16th, 1904. Now it says, in the style of Ulysses, which I'm realizing I didn't ask anything about inspired by or in the style of Ulysses. Maybe choosing those as synonyms. I don't know. I've read this too many times. But just as Dermot reads this for you, ask yourself, is this in the style of Ulysses? Here's Morning Vapors. Take 2.
Morning vapors. St. Stephen's Green stirred with a slow breath, its chest heaving under the damp weight of morning. Clouds clung to the trees, their branches stretching like yawns to the sky, and Dublin, restless as a dreamer woken too soon, shook itself alive. Cobblestones glistened wetly underfoot, a drunken mosaic of grey and silver. Leopold Bloom stood by a shop window on Grafton Street, adjusting the brim of his hat with one hand and clutching a paper-wrapped bundle of liver in the other. He had meant to take the tram, but the morning, soft and strange, held him in its thrall. The butcher's string bit into his fingers as he shifted the bundle from one hand to the other. Behind the glass, a mannequin in a green dress stared out blankly, its hand frozen mid-gesture holding a parasol. He frowned at it, as if it might speak.
So, Dermot, what do you think? Compared to the last one, and now we've got this, what do you think?
It likes that teleportation from Stephen's Green to Grafton Street. It didn't change that.
That's
the same.
The structure is the same.
It's like it's a completely different draft.
Right.
It's like the first version's gone, and apart from those gross aspects, but all of the language, like the trees' nostrils are gone. Their branches stretched like yawns to the sky, whatever that means.
How do branches stretch like yawns? Do yawns stretch? We were just reading just in a reading group here in town where we live. We were reading about the part in Proteus where Stephen's trying to work out the rhyme from my mouth to her mouth in his poem. And I know I think it's in Ulysses, says, is a mouth south in some way? And that's how this feels of I'm trying to make this make sense, but it just doesn't.
It's better than the first one.
You think so?
I do, yeah. But It's still silly.
Yes. It's the least silly of all the things we had to generate, I think. There's just like a muddledness to it. Yeah. It just doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. I read these 2 paragraphs over and over. If you read more of it, maybe the story moves somewhere, but it's got Leopold Bloom. It knows now that he likes organ meats, but it gets the wrong organ. I don't know, I wanted to find and replace, and it didn't do that. I don't know if there's a way to ask it to do that. It does seem to kind of demonstrate what the Psychology Today article talked about, that it kind of resets with each prompt.
Yeah.
because I gave it a new prompt, which is put in Leopold Molly Bloom. The structure is more or less the same, but the words are all totally different. You could see how if you were using this to generate a novel for you, I'm not even going to say help you write your novel, because this is doing all the work and not doing a very good job of it, in my opinion. You would have to take this and, like, still go back and do a lot of work with it. A good or bad novel is subjective. I assume that because you're listening to this, you have some opinions about literary fiction, but this is not literary. It's not in the style of Ulysses. Like, it's fairly generic. There's nothing really Joycean about this. Obviously, Joyce employs figurative language, but, like, these aren't going anywhere. Like, they're just comparing things to other things, but there's no deeper sense of that you could really draw out of it. And that's for all the reasons that we've said so far. Yep. Yeah, so no, I don't think it could write a novel by itself. You as a human would still have to do so much legwork. I don't know, just write your own novel. I have more thoughts about that, but I'm going to leave this section here. I'm going to turn our talk back over to Dermot, because we have to contend with a major question about AI, which is AI stealing?
Well, the image I used for this slide was stolen from a dead guy, but he's dead, so that's cool. And as you can see, the AI brain extraction machine is taking all of his thoughts, and his wife isn't happy with that.
I still think she's into it. She thinks he's hot.
He's been turned into a philosophical zombie now. Cyberman or something. Okay. So for an LLM like ChatGPT to work, it has to be trained first, and training means that you got to stuff it full of data so that the model can complete the calculations that we've already mentioned. To produce the type of output we've already shared requires an enormous amount of training data. So this stuff has to come from somewhere. OpenAI claims that they've used about 570 gigabytes to train the previous GPT model, but they haven't publicly disclosed how much was used to train version 4. And most of this data was compiled from publicly available corpuses like Common Crawl and Wikipedia. And Common Crawl's dataset does include copyrighted works. So Meta, formerly Facebook, recently got into hot water when it was revealed that they used the entirety of LibGen to train their Llama LLM, which means that they used pirated copies of copyrighted material to train their model. The New York Times is currently suing OpenAI because they believe that their copyrighted work was included in the data used to train ChatGPT. And everyone's favorite human being, Nick Clegg, recently complained that having to gain consent from copyright holders would make generative AI impossible. And this is from The Verge. Speaking at an event promoting his new book, Clegg said that the creative community should have the right to opt out of having their work used to train AI models. But, he claimed, it wasn't feasible to ask for consent before ingesting their work first. So, you know...
Do you think that book is copyrighted?
Of course it is. And
does he expect me to pay human money for it?
He does.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't it, though? Isn't it? Yeah, and he made millions working for Facebook/Meta. Yeah, no, the hypocrisy is fairly rank. And does he think we're stupid? We just want to take your book and all your work, take it into our data mine. We'll put it into our big, gigantic slot machine. But if you want us to take it out, we'll do it. Yeah, trust me, bro, it doesn't cut it.
Mm-hmm.
Not even close, because they're not taking it out. They're not taking it out. The issue, again, is the sheer quantity of data that's required to train the models. The AI companies are willing to hoover up colossal amounts of data to train their models and profit off of it, regardless of who that data belongs to.
So we've got a quote here again from the New York Times article from May of 2025. For years, companies like OpenAI relied on a simple concept. The more internet data they fed into their AI systems, the better those systems would perform. But they used up just about all the English text on the internet, which means they needed a new way of improving their chatbots.
So the amount of training data required to produce an LLM is so great that it has created a bottleneck in terms of producing the next model of the big LLMs. I read this?
Yeah, this is, Dermot's going to read a quote here from Bloomberg from November of 2024 from an article titled OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic are struggling to build more advanced AI.
And again from Bloomberg, the companies are facing several challenges. It's become increasingly difficult to find new untapped sources of high-quality human-made training data that can be used to build more advanced AI systems. Orion is, this is me talking, the GPT-5, the next version they've been promising forever. Orion's unsatisfactory coding performance was due in part to the lack of sufficient coding data to train on, two people said. At the same time, even modest improvements may not be enough to justify the tremendous costs associated with building and operating new models, or to live up to the expectations that come with branding a product as a major upgrade. So human-generated data, this is now more slides here from different newspapers. Human-generated data is required to train any future models. The current ChatGPT model available is GPT-4, and that rolled out in 2023. OpenAI had promised version 5 by mid-2024, but like Elon Musk's rockets, they keep getting kicked down the road. So CEO Sam Altman is now pushing those promises further and further out. We'll be in Mars by 2027, 28, 29, 30. So AI-generated text can't be used to train subsequent models because it degrades the quality of the output of the LLM. So for older people listening, they will be well familiar. Youngers won't, but trust us, bro. If you make a copy of a copy of a copy of a VHS tape, I think you lose about 10 to 15% of the vertical lines every time. It looks like trash after 2 or 3 even. Same with the Xerox copier. After 4 or 5 times, it's like a Jackson Pollock. So it's speculated that this shortfall of data is stymieing the development of GPT-5, which is a major logistical hurdle. And there's not more human-produced data because we are hitting peak data.
Yeah. And we have a quote. This is from a December 2024 New York Times article called, "Is the tech industry already on the cusp of an AI slowdown?" The article says, Ilya Sutskever, who was instrumental in pushing the industry to think big, is a researcher at both Google and OpenAI before leaving OpenAI to create a startup this spring, made the same point during a speech last week. "We've achieved peak data and there'll be no more," he said. "We have to deal with the data that we have. There's only one internet." The implication being that they use the whole internet to train what we've got right now.
So they need George R.R. Martin to finish the Song of Ice and Fire books, otherwise they're screwed.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's something to consider when you hear the AI boosters insisting, "This is the worst the technology will ever be." So there may be hard limits to how good it can become, and it can't get there without large-scale theft of artistic work and of just everybody's work. All your messages, all your DMs, everything is being mined. Like sometimes now you'll see comments on YouTube that are written by an AI, but I don't think the scrapers will know that they are. So unless they have an AI to filter out the AI, then they could be in big trouble.
Yeah, and I want to hit that point one more time before we move into the next section, because Dermot explained it really well, but I again just want to emphasize in case it went by you. They've used all the English text data available on the internet. It's all been used to train the current version of not only ChatGPT, but the other LLM chatbots that exist. And you might be thinking, but Kelly, these bots generate text, so they could generate text and then feed that text data into the new models to train those, and they are infinite text generators, so they could just infinitely pump out more text data to then feed into the model that'll become Orion or ChatGPT 5 for OpenAI, and they've solved their own problem. It's a perpetual motion machine. But like Dermot said, that AI-generated data degrades the quality of the output of the models it's trained on, so it needs our data, and there is no more. Like, it's likely any book you've ever read, anything you've looked at online, has all been used to train the current model. So this might be the best it can be, because what are you going to train it on? And I know one of the Times articles mentioned they needed to think of a new way of training it. So what they're working on right now with a GPT-5, and as of recording, they haven't successfully created this new model, but it's called a reasoning model. You know, there's not enough training data to put into the system to make a big enough leap to what they could call and market, more importantly, market as GPT-5. They've come up with these reasoning models where instead of just a straight shoot from prompt to answer, they kind of go through this list of reasoning tasks to get the answer to the prompt. But the reasoning models don't seem to be working at the moment, though, because with each new step you add, the problem of hallucinations comes back up. This is a hypothetical number I'm just picking. If there's 5 steps you have to go through in this reasoning process, each step there's a chance of hallucination. There could be hallucinations in all 5. There could be hallucinations in just 1 or none, but you don't really know, and the hallucinations compound on top of each other. So that's where you get that like 79% is hallucinated. because you can't just feed endless data because we've reached the end of the endless data. And as someone who can explain that in a much more sophisticated way than I can, I would recommend that New York Times article about the hallucinations are getting worse. It does a really good job of explaining it. It's really kind of gumming up the works for these companies right now because they don't know how to solve it. And it's a problem with every model and with every update to every model is the hallucinations don't go away, and they're just a major problem, to the point where I feel like the tech was rushed to market. I don't think it should have been put out in the form that it's in, because people don't always know that it hallucinates, and so they assume that everything it's telling is true. It's also why the chatbots, I think, are insufficient as a search engine replacement, which is often how they're marketed, as a super powerful search engine that just tells you the things that it knows because it's so smart. It's really kind of gumming up the works for these companies right now because they don't know how to solve it. And it's a problem with every model and with every update to every model is the hallucinations don't go away. They're just a major problem, to the point where I feel like the tech was rushed to market. I don't think it should have been put out in the form that it's in, because people don't always know that it hallucinates, and so they assume that everything it's telling is true. It's also why the chatbots, I think, are insufficient as a search engine replacement, which is often how they're marketed, as a super powerful search engine that just tells you the things that it knows because it's so smart. ChatGPT and any other chatbot is not a search engine. I really want to emphasize that. They are not search engines. You think of Google, and if you ask it, did Oliver St. John Gogarty use laudanum? It's going to bring up a bunch of articles and web pages about Oliver St. John Gogarty that you can read that were written by people who know something about Oliver St. John Gogarty. But if you ask ChatGPT the same question, you might get the correct answer, but it's not guaranteed that you will. And also, you're not reading anything that was written by someone who knows about that topic. You are just getting statistical output from a computer that has been fed a bunch of data that, through happenstance, included information about Oliver St. John Gogarty. So it doesn't know anything. You're not reading the articles written by people with that knowledge, and you're getting kind of a regurgitated version. And it absolutely is theft. I didn't feel like we said that strongly enough.
Yeah, I think looking back on it, like at least one person asked a question at the back that was going to push him back a bit, in a sense. You're completely ignoring the fact that even if the machine works as you think it does work, this is all stolen stuff. Anyway, that's moving on to the next question, I guess, which would be, is given everything that we know about this that sucks, at least can you use it for research, academic research?
Yeah. One proposed use for generative AI is in the academic setting in schools or universities. Having ChatGPT generate an essay, paper, or other long-form work will result in all of the problems we've already discussed. Hallucinations, continuity problems, the ethics of large-scale artistic theft. So I don't really want to look at it from that point of view. If you're a student and you're generating text with ChatGPT and turning it in as homework, you're not learning anything and it's not your work. You're doing yourself no favors, but whatever. I wanted to give ChatGPT a fair shake, so I decided I would give it what I considered to be a simple academic task. So for this section, I consulted with a couple of experts, the first of whom is a gentleman named Paul Farrelly. Paul is a longtime IT specialist from Toronto, and he's also an avid reader of Joyce. He's also a believer in generative AI as an emerging technology, so he seemed like the perfect person to talk to for this project. I met Paul through the James Joyce Centre. They really recommended him as someone that I should talk to. And I was telling Paul via email about my woes with ChatGPT, kind of the morning vapors of it all. He told me that what you need to do is go to the Explore tab on ChatGPT's interface. Now, if you want to recreate this experiment at home, that tab is now changed to just GPTs, but it'll do the same thing. If you go into that GPTs tab, if you type in James Joyce there, it will pull up a dozen or so Joyce-themed chatbots. I had originally just assumed that these bots might have been trained on the works of Joyce, but I don't think that's the case. I spoke to a second IT professional named Ryan Tannenbaum. Ryan, just for full disclosure, Ryan is a longtime friend of mine, but Ryan works as an IT person for international schools in Korea. Part of his job is building and using generative AI tools more in the administrative end of schools where he works. So I thought he could just answer a bunch of questions for me about how AI works, but we got into some good conversations, so we'll sprinkle this in as we go. Tannenbaum explained to me when I showed him these chatbots that they are likely just ChatGPT Prime with some additional code to prompt them to write in the style of James Joyce. It is not clear to me what that would mean. We kind of saw a little bit of that with the Oliver St. John Gogarty response, but we'll get into it. But I decided to test drive a couple of them, and I just used the first two on the list. I just thought that's the best way to get a random sample. I just picked the top two. One was called James Joyce Chatbot, and another one was simply called James Joyce. Now, what does it mean that they're writing in the style of James Joyce? In my case, it meant that they generate overly verbose arch prose that I find it impossible not to read in a silly voice. I've read James Joyce's novels fairly in depth over many, many years. I've read a lot of Joyce's personal correspondence as well, and the output of these bots don't sound anything like Joyce's writing to me, but again, I'd rather show than tell. So I asked a very basic question, which is explain the correspondences of the Wandering Rocks episode, hoping to get back like color and organ and time of day and arts and techniques and things like this. And this is what it said.
Explain the correspondence of the Wandering Rocks episode.
Wandering Rocks, my polyphonic fugue, my Dublin kaleidoscope, my mischievous sleight of mind. In this episode, I shattered linearity and made the city's breath itself the central character, fragmenting narrative like shards of a looking glass. You ask of correspondences. Very well. Let's light our candle and descend.
Okay, so it's a pretty big stylistic shift from the other GPT output that I showed you before. I was so shocked when I got this. This sample is from the one that's just called James Joyce. I went back and read the full response. Again, this is just the start of it because this is funny. There's not much else to show you because it doesn't ever explain the correspondences that you'd find in one of Joyce's schemata, I guess you'd say. Like, these are things I could pick any of the books off my shelf here in my room. I could open up my Stuart Gilbert book or my Richard Ellman book, and they're just listed in a table. And it'd tell you right away. You can just look and see what they are. I don't think it understands that correspondences mean something specific in the context of Joyce, because it doesn't know about the context of Joyce. It doesn't know anything. It doesn't think. Stop anthropomorphizing Kelly. It correlates more broadly just the general meaning of correspondences, and kind of gives you some general thematic descriptions of Wandering Rocks, which aren't worth reading because they're fairly shallow. I was unsatisfied with that, and I was even more unsatisfied when it also generated me an unsolicited poem describing the Wandering Rocks episode of Ulysses, which I will now force Dermot to read.
Shall I versify it for you? I think I shall. In city scheme the voices tread, like bees in bloomless hour fed. A priest, a girl, a drunkard sigh. The viceroy passes, heels held high. No hero here with spear or cloak, just drifting minds, the wandering folk. A labyrinth that time forgets, crossings made and no regrets.
So, it might be against the Geneva Conventions, me making you read this so many times.
It doesn't get better.
I showed this to Tannenbaum, and he told me that chatbots like ChatGPT can produce rhyming couplets like this, but struggle with any more complex rhyme schemes, which I found interesting. But look, like I said, I would consider this type of creative text generation to be a weak point for ChatGPT overall. So I came up with what I thought would be a simpler task, even than just asking it like the correspondences, which is just to make me a list of sources for a topic. When I was working on the research for this talk, I had just finished research for a blog post on the structure of the Wandering Rocks episode, so I asked for a list of AI sources topic.
Question: give me a list of sources to read more about the structure of Wandering Rocks. Answer:
Ah, excellent. So, you're taking the map and compass to the archipelago of Wandering Rocks. Beware, every source is a lighthouse or a will-o'-the-wisp, depending on the hour and the reader. But I'll set you up with a solid sextant of scholarship. Here's a curated list of books, articles and studies that sail closest to the intricate structure and correspondences of that episode. Some are scholarly harpoons, others poetic lanterns, all worthy.
Hey, what a crazy sentence. Beware, every source is a lighthouse or will-o'-the-wisp, depending on the hour and the reader. So does that mean, like, if I read Stuart Gilbert by noon, I'll get some insights, but if I read him under the dark of night, that, he'll lead me astray? Like, also just don't give me the ones that are wrong. Anyway, I don't know what a scholarly harpoon or a poetic lantern is, but I'm getting hung up on this. What we should be focusing on is the claim that they're all worthy. And I think we should just evaluate that. I have a pretty solid handle on the best sources for this particular topic, so I thought I'd be able to judge them pretty easily and see how the bot did. And what I got back was a list of 8 sources and 1 bonus online resource. I don't understand why it's bonus, so I'll just call it 9 sources. And let's go through the list and see how many of those are worthy. So, this is a list entitled Essential Sources on the Structure of Wandering Rocks. So the first one up is Hugh Kenner's Ulysses, which is a book that's on my shelf, so I could go check it very easily. It recommends you read the chapter The Ineluctable Modality of the Audible. That chapter does not exist. It then tells you that Kenner discusses cinematic montage, cubic structure. He does not discuss any of those topics, and there is a quote that it also gives. That quote does not appear anywhere in the book. This source is fake. The next one up is Don Givard, Ulysses Annotated, another book that is in this very room as we speak. It basically describes what an annotation is and why it's useful. This one, I'll give it a smiley face. That one's real. Next, number 3 is Karen Lawrence, The Odyssey of Style in Ulysses, a book I saw cited by many other sources when I was doing my reading. However, it says that her analysis focuses on Joyce's stylistic pluralism. If that is something you were hoping to read in Lawrence's book, you're going to be disappointed because those words never appear in the book. That's a fake. Next is a book by Margot Norris, one of my favorite Joyce scholars, and it recommends the book The Decentered Universe of Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses. So Norris did write a book called The Decentered Universe of Finnegan's Wake. ChatGPT was very helpful and added and Ulysses so that I could use it. But as this book does not exist and the real one only talks about Finnegan's Wake, there's nothing in it about Wandering Rocks. This is a fake source. Next, we have Fritz Sen, Inductive Scrutiny's Focus on Joyce, a book of essays. However, the essays it recommends, Crossings and Convergences and The Maze of Wandering Rocks, do not exist. This is a fake source. Next, Michael Seidel, Epic Geography, James Joyce's Ulysses, does include a section about Wandering Rocks, but unlike what ChatGPT says, it does not describe it as a topographic experiment or a city text. It discusses Wandering Rocks in terms of its mythical illusions. It does not explore Joyce's use of actual maps or city plans. As a bonus, this is a fake source. Next, we have Vincent Chang's article, Joyce and Politics in the Cambridge Companion to James Joyce. That's a real book, but Chang has no contribution to it, and there is no essay entitled Joyce and Politics in the entire book. This is a fake source. And finally, what is my favorite on this list is David Heyman article in a 1964 issue of James Joyce Quarterly entitled The Wandering Rocks Scheme. Any Joycean worth their salt will catch right away that it says scheme and not schema. So if you guessed that it was fake, it is. What makes this my favorite, though, is Heyman has no articles in Volume 2, Number 1 of 1964 James Joyce Quarterlies, but he does have an article in Volume 1, Number 2, but it is about Finnegan's Wake, and so this is a fake source. Maybe that online resource will help us out. It recommends the Mapping Ulysses project, which does not exist so much. There is a Mapping Dubliners project, which does what it sounds like. Again, the chatbot was so helpful, it changed it from Dubliners to Ulysses, so I could use it, but it does not exist, nor does the Mapping Ulysses Wandering Rocks, which it recommends searching for, fake source. So you were keeping Count Dermot, how many out of the 9 sources was a usable source?
1.
1, yes. I will be honest, I wasn't expecting much at all from ChatGPT. I was already aware going into this that there have been multiple very high-profile cases, particularly lawyers, getting into trouble for submitting hallucinated work that was produced by ChatGPT or other AI bots. You know, maybe you're an Irish MEP who used AI to write an open letter about Gaza that ended up quoting Swedish House Mafia. Yeah, or, you know, maybe you work in publishing and you needed to come up with a summer reading list and you used ChatGPT and all the books on it were fake. Yeah, so I thought, though, that it might be like 50-50, that's kind of what would make it hard to tell that it wasn't real. And I will say, when I first looked through these and I was showing it to Ryan, you know, I was saying, like, I haven't looked into this, but they seem like it's probably okay because I own some of these books, I'm familiar with some of the others, I know all these scholars' names, and he really was the one who encouraged me, like, no, go check these out. And he was absolutely right to do so, because it's a completely unusable list. And if you just took this and printed it somewhere, say in a brief for your legal case that you are the lawyer for, or in a summer supplemental in the Chicago Sun-Times for, you know, recommended reading, people will catch on right away because it might be obvious to someone. There's no 50-50. It's not like some of them are okay and some of them weren't. Like, it's right out the gate. I did not have to search or tweak or massage. It's just the first one up is entirely fake, and it's very easy to prove that it's not usable. Like I said, expected to be bad. I cannot overstate how absolutely floored I am by how bad it was at what should be a very simple task. But I do think generating this kind of list is outside the capabilities of LLMs right now, which again really pokes a hole in the idea that these are these incredible intelligence units that are search engines that can solve all of our problems. The time I spent checking ChatGPT's work and learning that all these sources are useless to me was roughly equivalent to the time it would take me to just go on JSTOR and Google Scholar and find a list of sources. The main difference here is that at the end of that time, I would have a list of sources to read and write about, whereas when I use ChatGPT, I have nothing to show for my work. ChatGPT just led me down this weird little cul-de-sac of misinformation. I showed all this to Paul Farrelly, who told me that there is a difference in quality among the Joycean chatbots on ChatGPT, and that the two I used are garbage. Fully agree. And he didn't say garbage, but basically, those are no good. Instead, he said, use what he considers to be the best of the bunch, which is called James Joyce's Ulysses Explorer. And so I typed my query for sources once again into James Joyce's Ulysses Explorer, and it just simply didn't answer my question. It told me a lot of other stuff about Wandering Rocks, just giving me, again, fairly shallow and brief overviews of the episode and topics related to it, and organized them into headers of structures and themes, notable vignettes, symbolism, and interpretation. It never gave me the correspondences still. Like, it still isn't giving me my art and technique and organ and color and all those. And I tried multiple times to get that list of sources, because that would be more valuable than the correspondences, because those are easy to find. They're on Wikipedia, they're in books. It just completely ignored my query and just never generated the list of sources. So if I had to speculate why, it's again because I don't think that that's something that the chatbots can do, but they just don't seem to be able to do that. Because this is the best of the lot, it just simply didn't do it. It just ignored me rather than give me a hallucinated list. Which is still useless. Like, thanks for not lying to me, but I still didn't get the information I wanted. This is not a search engine. No matter how many times people tell you that these are powerful search engines, they are worse than the search function on JSTOR.org, which is a fine search tool, but it's not like Google at its height or anything like that. Like, these are worse than that, because when I go on JSTOR, I end up with a few articles I can read. Here I end up with nothing. Farrelly did prefer this James Joyce's Ulysses Explorer over the others I showed him, and I do have to hand it to him. It dropped the goofy arch affect of the other two bots. It also added citations at the end of each paragraph that you can also pull up as a list in a sidebar. They're all clickable. I initially thought this was specific to this bot, but I've noticed these citations popping up in the main ChatGPT over the last, month or so as I've continued to play with it. I've also noticed using ChatGPT more recently that there's now also a message that pops up at the outset of a query that says searching the web. So one reason that it's bringing up these citations is that it's just Googling. And I asked Tannenbaum about this, and he confirmed to me that chatbots will often search Google for answers in the background. There was one of the bots, it was a question I asked about pizza. It's not related to Joyce, but just playing around with the bots. And it was so clearly in the format of Google Maps, of the types of listing you'd see in Google Maps. And when I asked Ryan about it, he said, yeah, they just Google. They just pull things in from Google. Why do I need ChatGPT to Google things for me? If it's this powerful new type of search engine, why is it just Googling for me? I can do that myself.
Because it's taking the traffic away from the website that created it, and it's then able to paste its adverts all over that content, which it has basically extracted and reframed off the original website that it took it from.
That's very true, and let me frame that a little bit differently. So I can look at the sources that are on here, and among the sources listed by the bot was content from Patrick Hastings' excellent website Ulysses Guide, and also my own Blooms and Barnacles article about wandering rocks. So I know it's scraping my website. I already kind of knew that. I could just infer from the way these models were trained that it would pull things from my site. This confirms it if I had any doubt lingering in my mind. Building on what Dermot said, and just thinking about this, I want to pose a question to you, listeners. Do you think that someone searching this query in ChatGPT is going to click into my site or Patrick's site? Or will they just take the answer to their question that the bot generated and move on with their day? Online writers and podcasters and other creators make their money by people engaging with their work. If ChatGPT is scraping my site or Patrick's site and reconstituting it into a ChatGPT response, traffic to our websites goes down, which means our income goes down. It's already incredibly difficult to make a living as an online creator. Thank you to all of our patrons who subscribe. And ChatGPT, when it scrapes like this, is taking money out of our bank accounts, even if it nominally credits us. A single real person reading my website or listening to my podcast, even if they're doing it for free, is far more valuable to me than 100 people maybe casually glancing at my name in ChatGPT. Paul envisions this version of ChatGPT as sort of a way forward, potentially a way to pay creators whose work is cited. I'd still say stolen. Right now, this is a hypothetical rather than a reality. Like, I'm not getting paid for this. And honestly, folks like Nick Clegg think it is world-ending for their industry to merely ask permission to use our work. So, do you really think these companies are going to start paying royalties? I don't think they will. I felt queasy when I saw my website cited on ChatGPT. I still feel gross looking at it now. I had my work cited in a talk I attended last year at the James Joyce Symposium. I cannot think of a more opposite experience. And look, it's not about money. I don't make money on either of those things. But one experience left me feeling really positive about my work, and the other felt like a seagull stealing ice cream out of my hand. That's how you do figurative language. I don't make Blooms and Barnacles for the money, but I found this experience to be profoundly bleak. And this was the good bot.
Yeah, I think the idea that these people are suddenly going to start writing checks is so... I'm sorry, it's so
Pie
naive.
in the sky.
It's so naive. It's kind of insulting, actually. If your business is dependent on theft, then you don't have a business, you're running organized crime.
If you have to steal to run your business, you don't have a successful business. You have a failed business.
Yeah. This is the quadrillion-dollar question, because we already asked the million one. Is AI inevitable?
Yeah. So one of the most troubling aspects to me about the current AI hype cycle is the language of inevitability that encompasses all these products. I see this language as merely a sales pitch. Many Silicon Valley companies run at a loss for years and rely on successive rounds of venture capital funding to stay afloat. I mean, this is true for Uber, for Twitter, like huge companies that you know and have probably used at some point. It's also true for OpenAI, which we saw quoted in TechCrunch isn't expected to be profitable until 2029.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Just 4 years from now.
Yeah.
It's true of a lot of Elon Musk's companies as well.
They're all subsidy dumpsters. Like they're all. If you drill down deep into where the money's coming from, it's coming from the government. And people go, "Oh, he's funding it with his own money." No, he's not. Like if you go deep.
That's specific to Elon, though.
But he's same. They're all the same. They're all getting VC money. They have a burn rate.
The VC model is a huge problem here. A lot of the problems we see with this are economic because of the way these companies are floated. Because if you're going to ask someone like Peter Thiel or Masayoshi Son, Mark Andreessen, whoever, for billions of dollars, it's billions of dollars that they're asking in investments, right? You need to convince them that your fantastical magic AI machine does more than write business emails or Google James Joyce sources. Instead, Silicon Valley CEOs promise magical technology that will produce infinite growth and infinite wealth forever to their investors. And if you stand in the way of this unfettered growth, you are denying life to future generations. It gets very hyperbolic, but I assure you this is a common enough line of argument. All this has produced a massive economic bubble that could pull down a sizable chunk of the tech economy when it bursts. Normies like us might miss this in the regular press around these technologies, as many tech journalists are very dependent on access to the CEOs of these companies, and often print what amounts to press releases about the sky-high promises of these so-called innovations. Yeah, if you print something Sam Altman doesn't like, he's not going to talk to your outlet anymore, and you lose the clicks on what's a very buzzy story right now. So crass, but that's kind of the way it works. And it's very bad for journalism. It's very bad for us as consumers of journalism and people who generally want to be informed. You can find good information on all of this stuff, but you really have to work to find it.
It's usually people like Cory Doctorow or Ed Zitron who are off the major media map.
Yeah, they're good, or Paris Marx.
Yes, yeah, people who are off basically like solo agents. But if you don't know those names, it can be kind of tricky to find them. And if you're getting your information from mainstream sources, you're not really properly informed.
I love podcasts, obviously, so if you're into listening to things, I couldn't recommend enough, especially Ed Zitron's Better Offline. If you want a charismatic Englishman to yell at you about AI, he's the one. And then if you want a calm and gentle Canadian to yell at you about technology, Paris Marx's Tech Won't Save Us is very, very good. And he also has another news podcast with Brian Merchant called System Crash. And those are all good places to start. What comes to mind for me when I hear all this AI hype is how we were told in just the last few years that blockchain and NFTs would soon govern everything from our bank accounts to our art galleries, and that fiat currency would soon become a thing of the past through widespread adoption of cryptocurrency. Remember when we were all told we'd be buying our groceries in the metaverse one day soon? Generative AI has survived longer than these other overhyped tech products because it does have some use cases, like we've already talked about. The use cases that recoup those billions in investment won't be for art, business, education, or any of the altruistic uses you might have heard floated for generative AI. The primary money-making use cases are largely in surveillance and warfare, headed by companies like Peter Thiel's Palantir. I just don't want to get into this too much, but I would recommend looking into those topics because I think if I start talking about Palantir, I'm going to sound completely unhinged. I just can't get into it. But look it up. I worry that over the course of the next few years, many companies and institutions will attempt to replace some percentage of their workforce with chatbots and ultimately regret doing so. Chatbots can't actually adequately replace your job in most cases, but I fear companies looking to save a few bucks at the margins will still attempt to do so anyway, and this will cost people their jobs unfairly. Before we make this huge mistake as a society and then try to course correct, I fear we will in the meantime gut necessary services like our medical sector, like our schools, and replace them with AI slop, making all of our lives harder so that tech CEOs like Sam Altman can get richer and richer and richer. Why do we want to create a society where we no longer need humans? What kind of world do we want to leave for our children? Do we really want to torch our economy, our government, our culture, our natural environment so that a bot can Google things for us? We didn't even talk about any of the environmental costs on this. They're already telling towns, certainly in Ireland and the UK, I'm sure in the US too, that you might experience fluctuations in your power because it's needed to power the local data center. These data centers are incredibly power hungry. They need to be cooled, and they can only be cooled with fresh water. There are towns that are located near data centers that are looking at shortages of water and domestic electricity to power data centers. And they know AI is controversial, and you'll hear them say, well, they're not for AI, they're not for AI. They're absolutely for AI.
After all the years of corporate greenwashing, where we've been told, oh, we care about the environment and we all need to do our bit to conserve. And then the second they get like a magic slop machine that they can think that they can make trillions of dollars off, it's screw your river. And now I saw one headline where they were telling people we should stop taking fewer showers and baths and not use hot water because that'll be needed for the data mines. Go to hell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go to hell. My God. Yeah. Oh, but don't forget to recycle. Don't forget. Now, I'm saying that I don't want to sound like I'm anti-environmental. These people are. And, every little bit that we do here is completely negated 1 trillion times over by all of this.
Absolutely wild headline from the Irish Independent. We'll have to choose housing or AI, top civil servant warns. And then if you read some of the subheading here, power shortages mean the country will have to choose between artificial intelligence and housing, a senior government official has warned. I listened to an interview between TD Breed Smith.
Left-wing TD, yeah.
And if you're in the US, the TD is a version of like a congressperson in Ireland. And Paris Marx on his show Tech Won't Save Us. It was a paywalled episode on his Patreon, which is a great way to support your favorite creators. One thing that I remember her saying from that is Ireland does generate a lot of electricity from renewables, like wind, mainly wind, I think. But that right now, 80% of our renewable generated electricity is powering data centers. We produce a huge amount of renewable energy, but none of it's going to people's uses. It's all going to these data centers. Right. It's so wasteful. Anyway, as I prepared this talk, multiple people have asked me what James Joyce would have thought of AI. Joyce was never one to shun technology, as evidenced by his early enthusiasm for cinema. However, I can't imagine this enthusiasm would extend to a robot that steals and regurgitates a worse version of his art. I don't presume to know what Joyce would think about anything, as he was a singular mind and capable of surprising anyone. While I was doing my reading for my Wandering Rocks post from actual books, I did stumble over a quote from James Joyce's friend Frank Budgeon in his book James Joyce and the Making of Ulysses that I think does shed some light on this idea. Dermot's going to read that from the actual Dead Tree paperback copy of this book.
Joyce took carefully into account all the mechanical conditions of his day, but those mechanical conditions never influenced him in the sense that they influenced many of his contemporaries. The cubist, for example, is stricken with dull wonder by the massive organization of the machine at rest. The futurist is excited to frenzy by the speed and fury of the machine in motion. Both are slavishly subservient to the wheels and pistons of the engines that were created to be our slaves. Them the machine has mastered, but it has never influenced the material or outlook of Joyce in this sense. Except by way of observing its effects on the minds and movements of his characters, Joyce pays mechanical development no heed. Still less does he pay heed to it in his tempo of composition.
To conclude, a few thoughts. First of all, is that you have agency in all of this. Don't fall for crummy sales pitch. You don't have to use AI if you don't want to. You only make marginal gains by doing so. It is not inevitable that AI succeeds at all. I've been thinking about this idea of the nth meme that we talked about when we were going through Aeolus, which is an argument with a buried premise, right? There are so many arguments made in favor of AI that are entirely enthymemic. One of those buried premises is that this technology must exist, that we must use it would be a second one, and that it is inevitable is the biggest one of all, and that you must accept it is another one. I know when we gave this talk in Dublin, there was just one software engineer who very politely disagreed with this. And I think if the esprit d'escalier, you think of the best thing to say. What I would say to him now is I would start talking at him about enthymemes, I think much to his chagrin, because he would want that, is I think that there's a faulty premise, which is that this technology must exist at all. I think that if it can't prove itself to be useful to most people, that it should only exist on the margins. Yeah. And if it's too expensive to run on the margins, it has no place in society. Yeah. It must prove itself. Everyone else and everything else must prove itself within our society for its existence and its utility. And I don't think that AI should get a special pass.
I should mention that like those things that people say, like this is the worst it'll ever be, it's inevitable, those are all thought terminating cliches. They are designed to stop you from thinking and asking questions, or thought stoppers if you prefer. George Orwell warned against the kind of men who think in slogans. And you get that in the tech sphere. People who they allow their thought to be monopolized by slogans and cliches. And the cliches and the slogans do their quote-unquote thinking for them. There's no engagement with any kind of deep thought in the tech people that are pushing this, never mind the AI that they've created. It's a reflection of what they are.
I know I told Ryan the way to cure all the Silicon Valley CEOs is for them to take one 100 level humanities class of any kind.
Yeah.
I stand by that. Like,
well, I remember the engineer who was pushing back a bit. He said, you're criticizing for being statistical, but like reality is statistical. And again, esprit d'escalier was like, yeah, I know that quantum mechanics, the entire universe is probabilistic, right? But you weren't probabilistic when you bought the ticket to come in here and listen to us, were you? You made a conscious decision because you had interiority, because you're a human being. And his other comment, so no, that doesn't wash at all. That's linguistic sleight of hand. Didn't like that. And then the other comment that he said, like, it can be very useful for getting ideas for projects and blah blah. My response to that is, do you need $100 billion AI data mine to do that? Like, he was talking about using it for inspiration for stories. And have you ever considered taking a writing class? Because if you're a real writer, you don't need to ask a computer for suggestions for ideas. I have so many ideas that I will never finish. I don't need a machine to give you more ideas that I'll never finish because I don't have the time. If you have that kind of problem, then maybe the creative scene isn't for you. In any event, you're not writing, the bloody computer is, and that's not even doing it very well.
I will say now what I said in the room, and I think this is a good point that I wish I had built into the presentation. But again, like, we really had to like pare this down to get it into an hour. Writing is a practice. I enjoy writing. I've gotten better at writing, and writing this podcast in particular. There's a certain amount of tedium associated with writing. I mean, it's a cliche to say, I hate writing, but I love having written.
Yeah.
But what you are experiencing when you do these things that some people will pass off as drudgery, brainstorming ideas, outlining and considering the structure of whatever you're writing, successive rounds of editing and restructuring and pushing and pulling and trying to get things just right, you're practicing a craft when you do that. It can be tedious, but you are training yourself in a skill. Even if you don't love it, like, you're learning something by doing that. And you cannot outsource that to a computer. Let's say I want ChatGPT to outline my next blog post. Maybe I've never written a blog post before and I'm not sure how to outline it. If I just have ChatGPT do that for me every time, I am jumping over the step of learning how to do that. Like, you'll never learn how to do it yourself. I mean, that's so valuable. It's so strange I have to make the case for learning as a concept, but if ChatGPT does it for you, you gain nothing from that. You'll have an outline, but it's like if you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. If you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. think I said that backwards. You know, exercising your mind, building those muscles and those skills is so valuable if that's what you want to do. If you want to be a writer, you simply must write. There's no way to outsource that. If that's a skill you want to have, the desire to bypass this is just nonsensical to me. Because maybe that's not the skill you bring to the world. That's fine, you know, maybe you do something else well. But whatever it is you do well, you worked at that. It's a practice, it's a discipline. Not everyone needs to be a writer. Not everyone needs to be an artist. There are people who want to develop those skills. You just can't outsource that. Go ahead.
There's a philosopher of mine, or philosopher of knowledge, called Michael Polanyi. He wrote a book called Study of Man, I think. But in one of his books, anyway, he wrote about what I call deutero learning, where you learn how to learn. The process of learning makes you more flexible, more a bit able to learn future things. And to take away that struggle, you're basically tripling the mind's ability to learn more things in the future. And I know at the conference, I told the story of a writer, and I wish I could remember his name. And this is about 20 years ago. He said, reading his books, he realized he was kind of getting sloppy, and he reread one of his first books, which won an award with, and he was amazed by how much better his writing was. So he began going through his books to see when he began getting bad. And it was 1995 or 1996, and then he realized that's when I got my word processor. And so he realized that when he had a typewriter, making a mistake was painful because you had to like wind the paper back out and white it out and then think and then type it back in. So he would think before he wrote. But once he had the Pre-C, he was able to rattle away, cut and paste, Control X, Control V. The text was all free. It was fantastic, and he's flying around. But year by year by year, he became lazier and lazier and lazier. So the happy ending, which I didn't tell at the event, was he said, you know what, I'm getting my typewriter. He went into the attic, got it, took it down, and then his writing, all the the good habits came back, the bad habits went away. And same thing happened with me with animation. When I began originally, I was doing hand-drawn animation, and that's a real struggle when you're animating by hand. But when you're animating by hand, you can do anything. Like that's the Warner Brothers stuff, eyes popping out of heads, teeth flowing in the air back again. When you work with a rigged puppet system in like vector animation or CG animation, you're given a rig and you can move it, and it's wonderful because it can do all these things, but some to varying degrees. But at some point, the rig will not do certain things. And so you stop doing those things and give yourself 10 to 15 or 20 years of that and watch what happens to your work. It just becomes more and more and more constrained. And so I went back to doing hand-drawn animation, and suddenly I was able to turn characters around, pop eyes out of heads, do whatever I like. Any style I like. It's mine. And what we see with the AI is people applying that, but God almighty, not just to animation or writing, but to their entire life. It's catastrophic, potentially.
Yes, and I mean, this isn't just our opinion. Microsoft, of all organizations, Microsoft itself did a study that, at least in that one study, it shows that people who use chatbots to do a lot of their thinking, or even just like, you know, organizing tasks and things like that for them, that their critical thinking skills do seem to diminish with a lot of generative AI use. Do with that what you will.
So one thing we're going to leave out, because this is running very long, is there have been some really incredible stories. We'll put the slides up, and you can follow these if you like.
Yeah.
People who are developing, I think it's fair to call it psychosis.
Psychosis is the word used in the reports I read about.
New York Times, I think that, I'm not a huge fan of MIT.
New York Times, but it's Kashmir Hill. She's very good. She's another good writer to read is Kashmir Hill. She works for the New York Times. Also Miles Klee and Rolling Stone, who wrote a second article that's very similar to the one you're about to comment on.
So the AIs are very sycophantic, and they became even more so with a recent update. So they've been telling people how wonderful they are. People are beginning to believe via the AI that they're a supreme being. One man was told by the AI that he could fly if he just believed enough. Step off the roof and you can fly. And I think he began to have suspicions, but I think he still uses it. These are like, stop using this thing. It's poison. You think you've seen the worst, and then you find another story that's even worse. Trying to wrap a little bit is just don't believe the hype. Because the financial incentive behind these people, like Microsoft has spent $97 billion, that's moon-based money, on this thing. And I think they've, quote unquote, made a profit of $3 billion, that's probably doctored.
The singularity hasn't happened.
There's only another $97 billion to go.
So
these people have a vast incentive to lie, or to exaggerate, and a huge incentive to basically compromise the ethics of journalists, to write certain pieces about it.
Yeah.
Do not trust it and take everything
As well
with
as
a
the
pile of
ethics
sand.
of people who run countries.
Yeah.
You
The
know?
Irish government is considering using AI to write government reports.
I can't imagine anything will go wrong with that.
No.
And I would encourage any cultural institutions, like the James Joyce Centre, to strongly reconsider jumping on the AI bandwagon. When I talked to Paul Fairley, he suggested the idea of training an LLM on Joyce scholarship. Specifically, he mentioned the archives of James Joyce Quarterly and using it for some nebulous scholarly research project. It wasn't super clear because I think this is all just in the idea phase. But I personally can never endorse such a project, which, again, Fairley told me is strictly hypothetical now in June of 2025. Look, you can train a bot on the works of a dead author, but anyone telling you that that means you can speak to James Joyce is marketing to you. It's marketing and nothing more. One thing that Paul said to me over and over again when we talked to him was the reason to embrace AI is because the medium is the message. We ended up talking about other things, so we didn't go fairly deep into that. But I've just had that in my mind for the last month. What message are you communicating to your audience if you are communicating to them through AI-generated text? Or art.
I think it's a misreading of McLuhan, isn't it? Like the whole McLuhan thing is like it's a warning. It's not like, oh, this is great. No, it's dangerous. There's inherent dangers with any tech, good and bad, but there are inherent
I'm taking
dangers.
it as if I'm rather than just writing a thing myself, if I'm having ChatGPT write it for me, what is the message that action is communicating to my reader? That's how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave that an open-ended question to the listeners to make their own form their own opinion on that, because I can only think of really dark things. And it wouldn't reflect well on me as a writer pushing out AI generated slop as my own. It just wouldn't. I think that is the message, is that you kind of don't care. That you just want money. You want the quickest means to an end. It sucks, is what it means. And like, look, I know I'm just one person, but this is the platform I have, and this is what I want to use it to talk about right now. Even if I'm just talking to you, my Patreon audience, and whoever's watching this on YouTube one day. Using an LLM to summarize scholarly work, like in that suggested project with the James Joyce Quarterly archive, that means you're not reading the work of those scholars. If ChatGPT takes all of that archive in and then is telling you things about wandering rocks or whatever based on it, you're not reading those scholars' works anymore. You're reading a text generated by a bot that doesn't know anything about Joyce because it doesn't know anything, full stop. And rather than getting inside the minds of scholars, like Margot Norris or Vincent Chang, whose names popped up on that generated list, you're getting a watered down, likely hallucinated version of their fantastic writing. If you're going out of your way anyway to read scholarly writing, why do you want a simplified version of it? Like, what point is there to read scholarly work about Joyce other than to see inside the minds of scholars? I just don't know what the point of that would be. Norris and Chang and others like them have spent their lifetime thinking deeply and writing about Joyce and his work. I name those two specifically because reading their writing changed the way I think about Joyce and his work. And we also stifle the next generation of Norrises or Changs or James Joyce's, Agatha Christie, Brian Wilson, whoever, because we aren't reading or engaging with their work anymore when we convince ourselves that bot-generated slop is just as good or maybe even preferable. I just don't think it's possible to have those illuminating experiences with a chatbot that I had reading those authors' works. The chatbot cannot think, but we can. I can, and you can. We only diminish ourselves when we attempt to outsource our thinking and learning to a machine. Thank you so much for listening. Leave a comment down below. Let us know what you think. If we get a lot of questions, we could do a follow-up Q&A on this. You know, it might be interesting because there's always more to be said. And unlike most of the topics we cover, this is an evolving issue. So leave comments or questions, whether on our social media, on our YouTube, or on Patreon. If you like what we're saying, check us out, patreon.com/barnaclecast. There'll be links in the description. Bloomsbarnacles.com for the rest of our podcast. We thank you so much for listening, and go outside, be radical, and think for yourself.
Read a book.
Yeah.
Or two.
All right.
And you'll be two ahead of the tech bros.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Bye.